Good morning. This is Mike Billington. I'm the co-editor of the Executive Intelligence Review. I told you on Friday that Harley Schlanger would be back this morning. He's not, unfortunately. There's COVID problems in places he was visiting. He may or may not be back tomorrow. We'll see. So I am again doing the LaRouche Organization Daily Video Update. This is for Monday, July 18th. I'm going to touch on two issues today. One, the unraveling Western financial system, and in particular, the impact of this on the developing sector, facing a series of defaults across the world. And secondly, I want to discuss the assassination of Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, which has international implications of extreme importance. So on the economy, everyone's now feeling the impact of the hyperinflationary collapse in the Western financial system. It can't be avoided. Everybody's forced to face the fact that we've allowed our leaders to bring the system down. There are idiots like Joseph Borrell, who's the foreign affairs minister for the EU, who is ranting, as he did yesterday, quote, "The sanctions imposed by the EU and like-minded partners are already hitting Vladimir Putin and his associates hard. The impact will only increase. We need strategic patience until Russia stops its aggression." Now, I think all of you know this is total nonsense. What he's saying is our economy is collapsing, and the oil prices and energy prices are doubling, tripling, food scarcities, and so forth. Please be patient. We have to freeze for freedom in Ukraine, that great democracy. So this is insane. The war is not the cause of the financial collapse in the West. It has implications on it. These insane sanctions, which are actually insane sanctions against ourselves, especially against Europe. The West has been printing money at a pace unprecedented in human history, especially since 2008, when there was the big financial crash. At that time, no bankers went to jail. LaRouche's proposals for putting the banks through bankruptcy reorganization, the way Franklin Roosevelt did, were ignored. Instead, trillions of dollars were printed out of nowhere, not for the real economy, not for producing things, but for keeping the banks afloat and keeping the military fighting their endless wars. So now that money, those trillions of dollars, approximately $2 quadrillion, are flooding into the speculative markets, driving up prices. The price and hyperinflation is not caused by shortages. There are some shortages, but all you need is a hint of a shortage, and the people with this flood of money pour into the speculative markets, into the spot markets. They drive up the prices in order to make their own short-term profits, and effectively that's what's happening right now. Now, the response by the government is, do we keep interest rates low or do we raise interest rates? They're now talking about raising interest rates. Well, neither is going to work. If you keep interest rates low, you're going to have a hyperinflation like Germany did in 1923. And you've heard the stories, a wheelbarrow full of money to buy a loaf of bread, and the thief comes by and throws the money out and takes the wheelbarrow. Well, this is where we're heading. So they have to raise interest rates. And so what happens when you raise interest rates? Well, one thing is you're going to see a whole wave of corporate bankruptcies here in the United States by corporations already terribly strained by the high cost of energy, by the shortage of parts because of the supply chain breakdown, and so forth. And then you raise interest rates so they can't refinance their debt. Waves of corporate bankruptcy. Now, but what I want to address is what's happening in the developing sector. You saw what happened in Sri Lanka. Because of this crisis, they quickly ran out of their foreign reserves. They had no money to buy food, to buy energy from abroad. This caused riots. This caused a situation where the population just lost all control. They drove their president out of the country. And this is not only Sri Lanka. Even Reuters yesterday acknowledged that this is facing many, many more countries, 9 in particular, which they said in the article called, quote, "the big default, question mark, the dozen countries in the danger zone." And they say, quote, as rising borrowing costs, inflation, and debt all strike fears of the economic collapse in these countries. So they identify a series. These are major developing sector countries, big countries: Argentina, Ecuador, Egypt, Ukraine, which is facing default, Tunisia, Kenya, Pakistan, and more. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. So this is a general breakdown crisis, and it's one that cannot be solved within the system. Nothing other than a new system can deal with this total breakdown. This is why we are demanding a new Bretton Woods to create a new global financial system, which requires the US sitting down with Russia and China, not going to war. And I encourage you, if you have not already, go to the Schiller Institute website, sign our petition calling for a new Bretton Woods conference, and help circulate that. Now on Abe, this is important. Western intelligence agencies, of course, inevitably began talking about the lone assassin. This is a lone kook with a grudge who killed Abe. Isn't that a shame? Well, in such situations, you have to ask, cui bono? And we have in the past looked at these political assassinations, all of which have huge implications on the future of the human race as a whole. You can look at the killing of Aldo Moro in Italy, of Herrhausen in Germany, and of course, JFK, who had refused to commit to a full-scale war in Vietnam. There were other reasons for his assassination, but this is the big one. And once he was out of the way, America quickly became the dumb giant of the British imperial wars in Asia and Africa, and eventually in the Middle East. The fact that we lost every one of these wars did not matter to the government or to the Wall Street or the military-industrial complex, as long as the taxpayer money kept pouring in for the military buildup. Then, as it is today, this was totally supported. But who was Abe? Now, Abe was a conservative. He was anti-communist. He had allowed his nation to continue to be a permanent aircraft carrier for the U.S. military in Asia. It's an occupied country, after all. But he also treasured the massive Japanese investments in China and in Russia, especially the huge investments in Russian oil and gas. They're invested in the Sakhalin on the Sakhalin Islands, where Mitsubishi and Mitsui are the two big invested companies there. And the gas largely flows to Japan from that operation. And also in the Yamal gas facility on the Arctic, which is one of the largest in the world. And the Japanese are invested there. In particular, one of Abe's leading missions in his long tenure as prime minister was to resolve the territorial conflict with Russia, which over the contested northern islands, which Russia had seized after World War II. And by solving that, they could finally reach a peace agreement. They were still officially at war because they never had a peace agreement. And that would then facilitate rapid expansion of trade and Japanese investment in the development of the Russian Far East, one of the last really new frontiers in the world for huge development. Putin and Abe met 27 times during their Abe administration. Abe went to Russia 11 times. At several points, these negotiations seemed to be absolutely certain to close, to be a slam dunk, to make the agreement. The first problem was 2014, the Maidan coup in Ukraine. The elected government was overthrown by US and British sponsorship of the neo-Nazis. And soon after that, during the year of 2014, Obama and his national security advisor, Susan Rice, went to Japan, met with Abe, and railed at Abe and threatened him that he must join the sanctions against Russia. People close to Abe, who are close friends of ours, have confirmed that, in fact, Abe, since that time, has had a visceral hatred for Susan Rice. He did agree to impose sanctions. They were sort of symbolic. They didn't have any particular economic impact. But he was forced to stop the negotiations with Putin. Now, Rice is now Biden's director of the Domestic Policy Council. He's a leading advisor to the Biden administration. And she's a killer. She was proud of the fact that she was one of the leading forces that demanded a full-scale military assault on Libya for no reason. No threat to us. Gaddafi was not threatening anybody, but she led that proud fight, a genocidal war, and the assassination of Gaddafi. It's a killer. Keep that in mind. And as to the so-called lone assassin, it's a 41-year-old loner named Tetsuya Yamagami. He's reported to have been in the Moonies, and his mother especially was a member of the Unification Church, the Moonies, the cult of Reverend Sun Myung Moon. And apparently they conned his mother into giving the family wealth over to the church, some $700,000. Religious cult? Yes, it's a religious cult. Lone assassin with a grudge? Who is Reverend Moon? Moon was not just a cult leader. He was a central founding figure in the World Anti-Communist League, which was set up after the Korean War, WACL it's called, set up by the CIA and the so-called China lobby, the people here who were making sure that we do not recognize the Chinese government after the 49 revolution. So they, like in Europe, where the MI6 and CIA recruited former Nazis from Germany and Ukraine to be part of the Cold War against the Soviet Union. And we see the result now in Ukraine with the Nazi government there. So the same thing was going on in Asia. Former fascist militarists from Japan were recruited to be part of the Cold War against the Soviets and China. And Moon, in particular, was a founding member of WACL. Two Japanese war criminals played a key role in this with Reverend Moon in the founding and the running of the World Anti-Communist League. One was Ryoichi Sasakawa. You may have heard of him. He's famous because of the Sasakawa Foundation. He was in prison for several years after the war as a war criminal, but then he continued and still, or at least his name and his foundation continued playing a leading role in the Western world today. A second one was Nobusuke Kishi. Kishi was a top advisor to Prime Minister Tojo during the war. At one point, he ran the Japanese occupation of Manchuria. This is a top guy. Served 3 years in prison after the war as a war criminal, but he was released. Why? To become prime minister. Now, Kishi was Abe's grandfather. Kishi brought Reverend Moon, his collaborator in the founding of the World Anti-Communist League, brought him to Japan and the Unification Church, which is now just about as big in Japan as in Korea. He was a virulent anti-communist. Okay, but what about Abe? Abe wanted peace and development with Russia. And all of a sudden, while we're mobilizing, we meaning the West, US, UK, are mobilizing the world for war with Russia, Abe gets killed. He was no longer prime minister, but he was a very influential figure as the longest sitting prime minister in Japan's history. Now, these are the issues that have to be investigated. Now, hopefully Harley will be back tomorrow, but we're not sure. We'll see. There's COVID everywhere these days. Please be careful, take precautions, and we'll see you tomorrow. Tune in tomorrow. Thank you.